Hi, my name's Chadi. I'm a pediatrician specialized in adolescent and addiction medicine, which means that I look after adolescents, teenagers, who have different issues and problems related to vaping and substance use. I'm also a researcher. I work in Montreal at Saint Justine University Hospital Center. My research focuses on vaping, nicotine, and other substances. Mainly, I'm interested in understanding the effects of nicotine and vaping on the health of young people, but also how to prevent nicotine problems or vaping problems from happening, and if young people are addicted to e-cigarettes or vaping, how to help them. Today, we're going to try to answer some questions related to vaping and e-cigarettes, talking about the health aspects and some of the social aspects as well. Hopefully you'll find this interesting. So what is vaping? Vaping is using an electronic cigarette or a similar device to inhale, so breathe in, vapor mixed with little particles in it. All e-cigarettes pretty much all work the same and are all built the same. So they have a battery connected to a metal coil, a little heating element, that's then hooked up to a reservoir that contains liquid. In that liquid, there's different particles in it, sometimes flavors and other things. And so when the liquid gets heated, there's vapor that gets produced, and then these tiny little particles. And when you breathe in through the vape or the e-cigarette, those enter your lungs. This is a way to deliver the flavors, the nicotine, or other substances to your lungs and to your body. In some ways, vaping is very similar to smoking in the sense that there are different little particles, many of them potentially harmful. There's nicotine in a lot of the vapes and e-cigarette liquids, which that we can also find in traditional cigarettes. There are several different harms that we're starting to understand that come with vaping and using e-cigarettes. We can divide them in different categories. The first big category is that based on the substances or the things we find in the liquid, like nicotine for example, vaping can be very addictive and can also encourage young people to use other tobacco products or other substances because it has an effect on the brain. Another category of harms are harms that are related to lung health. So because they're tiny little particles mixed with the vapor that comes out of the e-cigarette, the lungs can be scarred from those particles. We know that long term, this can be very harmful and potentially lead to things like cancer, like could happen with traditional cigarettes, but also in the short term, because some of those substances are very toxic, the lungs can get very sick. So you can have trouble breathing or have very bad cough problems. And those are some of the cases of the lung problems we've heard about in the news. Another category of harms are injuries related to using those vapes or these e-cigarettes. If they aren't used properly or if they have a defect in them, the battery, for example, can overheat and people can get burned or scarred from using their e-cigarettes. And finally, because the majority of e-cigarette liquids contain nicotine, there are risks for the brain of an adolescent. So when you're a teen, your brain is still growing, it's still changing. And when nicotine gets to the brain, it can change and impact your ability to learn things and memorize things in the long term. And that might feel a little bit strange because when you use a vape or an e-cigarette, right away you might feel a little bit more awake. So it's a bit of a stimulant, very short term. But after a long time of using the nicotine in the vapes, your brain can get softened or weakened in some places, in some regions. And that's a pretty big harm that we're starting to understand more and more. As you probably know, vaping is very popular with young people. Why is that? What makes vaping so popular, or maybe so cool for some people? Well, we have to know that a lot of vaping companies have started marketing their products or selling their products with ads, with ways to talk about their products that were very appealing to young people. An example of that is that teens, young adults, received money to use the e-cigarettes, the vapes, post pictures of themselves on social media and make it look like something that wasn't harmful at all. It was actually pretty fun to do. Companies use a lot of flavors that were like dessert flavors or candy flavors that clearly would be more popular with young people. We have to know that when vapes and e-cigarettes were created initially, the idea was to find a way to make something that was less harmful than smoking for people who were already smoking. What we've realized is that some companies were sneaky about it. They tried to make products and ads that were appealing to youth who actually were not smokers already. So a lot of teens have developed a taste and addiction sometimes for those vapes and e-cigarettes, in part because of marketing and different ads, and sometimes because they got hooked up on some of the flavors, and because a lot of our friends maybe were doing it. Here are some questions that we've received from some of the students. There are several chemicals that we find in the aerosols that come from vapes and e-cigarettes, those tiny little pieces of hard metals or chemicals that can harm the lungs. Those, if we used them for a long period of time, could increase our risk of cancer. But the big problem we have is that vapes and e-cigarettes have not been around for a very long time, so it's very hard to know exactly how much of a risk for cancer vapes and e-cigarettes can cause. We know that vapes and e-cigarettes can harm your teeth and your gums. Yes, long term, they potentially could stain your teeth, but also they increase your risk of cavities and gum problems. Some flavors are particularly popular with young people. For example, dessert, sweet flavors, fruit flavors. Those flavors can make e-cigarettes and vapes more addictive for young people, meaning that they might be using more of them, and maybe using more of the nicotine as well. Long term, this can lead to addiction and more health problems, lung problems, for example, linked with vaping. We've heard a lot in the news about people getting very sick with vaping. Some people might have heard of the term popcorn lung. There are different ways in which the tiny little particles can harm the lungs, causing like an inflammation reaction, something that will make you very, very sick. In the US, more than 50 people have died because of the effects of vaping. We think that most of the people who've died were vaping vapes that had cannabis in them, and maybe some of the chemicals that are found in the cannabis vapes. Sometimes, vaping liquids come in very colorful bottles. I work as a pediatrician, and I've heard of young people, tiny little kids, drinking the liquid, thinking it was juice or some kind of candy. In some cases, that can lead to very, very severe medical problems, and even sometimes death. When there's a lot of nicotine in a liquid and we drink it all at once, that can be very toxic to the lungs. And there are also some other chemicals. So yes, it would be possible to die from drinking the liquid. How harmful is vaping really? We hear a lot in the media about how vaping can be this new terrible thing that can make you very, very, very sick. And then we think, well, there are so many people vaping and probably not that many people getting sick. Maybe you see your friends do it and they don't seem to be getting sick. Well, there's some things that we know about vaping and e-cigarettes and some things that we don't know. What we do know is that some people are getting very, very sick. We tend to want to compare vaping to traditional cigarettes. This is something that we can do, but really we should be thinking that a lot of people who vape are not people who would have been smoking cigarettes. So we're kind of thinking about a new type of risk, something that comes into your lungs, comes into your brain, that definitely can have effect long-term, short-term, and can be even deadly sometimes. So yes, there are risks with vaping, and we have to think very carefully if we want to start trying it, knowing that it's pretty easy to get hooked up to vaping. So vapes, e-cigarettes, produce what we call an aerosol, a mix of vapor and little particles. You can breathe that in if you're using your e-cigarette, but if your friend is using it or someone around you is using a vape, you can also breathe that mix of vapor and particles. Is that harmful? Yes. Research has shown that if there's nicotine in the aerosol of the people breathing it, there's a lot of that nicotine that's also found in the vapor in the aerosol that other people will breathe around them. Same with those chemicals and those toxic particles that we find in the vapor. So the closer you are to a person and the more you breathe their smoke, the bigger the harms that you might have. And with time, that can also be harmful to your lungs and even make you more sensitive to nicotine and other things like that. So there are a lot of different kinds of vapes and e-cigarettes and a lot of different kinds of e-cigarette liquids. We know that those liquids that have a lot of nicotine in them can be more harmful. Also, we know that certain vapes that are bought on the internet or that are from black market sources or things like that can be a lot more harmful. The liquids in them aren't really well controlled, and we don't really know what the ingredients are in some of those vapes. Those vapes are very dangerous because there are a lot of questions that we can't answer about them. Are vapes safer than cigarettes? Or are cigarettes more dangerous than vapes? One thing with vapes is that they are very new. So some of their harms might come in some years to come after using them for a long period of time, so we don't know that. We know that vapes can be more addictive than cigarettes sometimes because young people can use a lot of nicotine, sometimes a lot more nicotine than with traditional cigarettes. which means that they can be breathing a lot of those vapors and these toxic chemical products. Potentially, for adults who are trying to quit smoking and then use a vape, use less of it, and then stop using it, that might be a way to reduce harms. But for teens, we really don't know that vaping is an effective way to quit smoking. So I would say that comparing both is a little tricky and probably not the best way to evaluate the harms associated with vaping. Some young people can get very addicted to e-cigarettes and vapes, and that means they might need to get money to get them. Sometimes their parents don't agree with young people using vapes, so that can create conflicts or tension with their family members. Some friends might disagree with vaping and not want to be around someone who's vaping, so you see where I'm going. Vaping can definitely cause conflicts. We also know that vaping liquids that contain nicotine can have an effect on your mood, on your stress levels, so that can make it harder to get along with family members or friends. Some vaping liquids don't contain any nicotine at all, but most of them do, and some contain a lot of it. For example, one small nicotine pod can have the same amount of nicotine as an entire pack of cigarettes. Sometimes one tiny little cartridge can have the equivalent of 2 packs of cigarettes. What comes out of a vape is actually called an aerosol. It's a mix of vapor that usually comes from water, and then small little particles that are floating. This can be very harmful to the lungs and causes long-term health problems. There are several different ingredients in vaping liquid. First, there's a diluent, something that holds it all together, something like propylene glycol or glycerin, for example. Then in most cases, there's nicotine, or sometimes there's cannabis. Then flavoring agents. Flavorings come with different chemicals in them. And most of the time, they're traces, tiny little pieces of heavy metals, like nickel, for example. And all of them together form the vaping liquid. You can put several different substances in a vaping cartridge. In most cases, it's a liquid. That liquid can contain nicotine or marijuana or sometimes other drugs. Some vapes will allow you to use solid substances, like dried marijuana, for example. One big harm is that if the e-cigarette or the vape isn't designed to contain a solid or different types of liquid that are maybe thicker or a different texture, that's pretty dangerous. The e-cigarette could flame up or even explode. So we have to be very careful about that, without even speaking about all the harms that can come from all those other substances that we're putting in the vape. So depending on where you live in Canada, different provinces, different territories, vaping isn't something that you can do under the age of 18 or 19. So you can't buy vapes in stores or any other places if you're underage. Canada is really trying to control vapes and e-cigarettes tighter and tighter now. So there are different laws and rules that are happening at the country level, at the province or territory level, and then in different cities. For example, a lot of anti-smoking laws, like not smoking in public places, also apply to vaping and e-cigarettes. And there are a lot of things that are happening to try to make it that young people don't vape as much, or don't vape at all, really, because we know that there are a lot of harms that come with vaping. Because I'm a pediatrician, I recommend to all my young people not to vape because they're kids or even young adults. It is harmful to vape when you're an adult as well, but it is more harmful, definitely, to do it when you're a teen. The later it is in life when you start vaping, the better. Your brain continues to change until about age 25. More and more people are vaping. For teens in high school, for example, it's about 1/3 who said that they vaped in their lives. And there's a proportion of those people, and more of these people, who are vaping regularly or every day. It's hard to know exactly how many people are vaping just because things are moving so quickly. Because there are so many people who vape, vapes generate billions of dollars of money. That's coming close to the money that comes from cigarette sales all across Canada, for example, or North America. So these big tobacco and vaping companies are making a lot of money on the backs of young people who are buying their vaping products and their vaping liquids. Why does the government allow vapes to be sold when we know there are so many harms associated with them? Well, there is a possibility that vapes could be helpful for some people. We're thinking mostly for adults who are regular smokers. The problem with vapes is that they're not very well controlled. Some of those products, we don't even know what's in them. So that is something that the government is trying to change, being stricter and stricter with companies creating vaping products. So we're probably going to see some changes in the laws and rules around vaping product sales. We've known for a long time that tobacco companies tried to sell their cigarettes to young people. Why? Because if you start smoking young, you're going to buy cigarettes for a very long time and give a lot of money to companies. Similar strategies are happening with vaping companies who try to hook up young people on nicotine and vapes from a young age. And some of those flavors that are like candy or fruit, for example, are very attractive to young people. So they make them seem like they're not dangerous and fun to use and really more appealing. So that's probably one of the main reasons why we are seeing all these flavors. Health professionals like doctors or nurses are very worried about e-cigarettes and vaping. I think a big part of it is that we don't know a lot of things about it, and things that we do know, like harms, well, they're scary for health providers for sure and for young people as well. But health providers are trying to understand it better to educate themselves. So if you do go see your doctor or your nurse and tell them about vaping or ask them questions, they probably will be able to give you information and help you make healthier choices about vaping for yourself. We've just talked about several different aspects related to vaping, what they are, how they work, what's in them, how dangerous they might be, what the government, what healthcare providers are doing about them. Hopefully that was useful for you. If you're vaping, or if you know someone who's vaping and would like some help about that, would like to quit, for example, you have to know that it's possible. Going to see your health provider, your doctor, your nurse is a good first step. And there are also some very good online resources, for example, on websites like Health Canada, where you can get some unbiased information, because there's also some information out there that's not quite true, so it's good to get a good source. I'd like to thank all the students who sent in their questions for today's video. It helped make the discussion a lot more interactive.